Welcome to the Clinical Cookout. Hey now, it's your Auntie Ashley.
What's up? It's your girl, Auntie Shug.
Hey, it's your girl, Auntie Quiche.
Hey y'all, it's Auntie Amber.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. We are qualified clinicians who will cover various topics on mental health and will sometimes provide community resources. We are not being paid by any organization for our content, and any information we provide is general and pertains to our own personal experiences. We do not provide psychotherapy, diagnoses, or treatment recommendations on air. Any concerns related to your individual mental health should be directed to your medical and mental health professionals. We are not responsible for others' decisions or the subsequent consequences.
Welcome back to the Clinical Cookout, y'all. It is our episode for Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth, everybody. Yeah. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Juneteenth. You're going to hear from each of the aunties on our perspectives. But before we do that, we're going to hop into our hot sauce, which is our segment of just spicy conversation about a particular topic to get the conversation going. And today that topic is going to be generational curses. So what that means is there is something that we learned or saw, in past generations. And over time, we've kind of kept that, whether it be in the same exact way or whether we've transformed it into something different. And really, it's a form of social conditioning. So learning things, continuing to do it over time, but also just not really being aware of how it impacts you currently. All right, so I just want to check in with the aunties. What do y'all know about generational curses, and what do y'all think about it?
For me, when I hear that generational curses, honestly, the first thing I think about is biblical, because that's something that's said in the Bible too, a generational curse. But then I can immediately tie it to our community due to slavery, of course. And just the curses that have been passed down, the patterns, the negative patterns that have been passed down that we just can't break away from, that then cause the trauma that we have.
What do you think is one of the negative patterns?
Negative patterns. Okay, so for example, right now on social media, any day you go on social media, you can see the discord between Black men and Black women. I don't care what day it is, whether we talking about dating, whether we talking about marriage, there's always this disconnect between Black men and Black women. And that literally stems from the things that occurred during slavery, breaking us apart, selling us off to different places. We were not allowed to be unified and connected in that way. And Black men weren't able to protect Black women. So that passed down to, you can't protect me, you didn't protect me, so now I'm independent and I have to protect me. So now that we don't have the shackles of slavery, that still shows up.
I would say another negative pattern is rest. We do not know what that word means, and it is consistently passed down because we've always had to be always thinking and moving and strategically figuring out the system to survive. And I feel like part of that has been passed down and pretty much a generational curse because it's a constant thing we always have to think about. I feel like there's never a moment for us to rest. There's never a moment for us to be like, okay, I'm just going to hand this over to you. I'm not going to think about it. It's never, I feel like we're not conditioned that way. And so we don't get the opportunity to rest. So I think that's a pattern that's, to me, a curse because it causes a lot of medical and psychological problems.
Yep.
I want to tie y'all's together. So the strong Black woman, I think, comes from the patterns of slavery, Ashley was talking about how it comes from slavery and how we were separated from our Black men during slavery. So they didn't protect us. They didn't provide for us. We kind of had to do it for ourselves. And so since we've been conditioned to be against the Black man and to have, more faith in ourselves than we do in our partners, especially if our partner is a Black man, or the Black man to even be mentally conditioned that he is not good enough to take care of his woman, or if she makes more money than him, then somehow he doesn't measure up. I think that contributes to us not getting rest. And I know as a Black woman, I don't get rest. So I made it a point today to not do anything. I didn't go to church. I didn't get off my tail all day. I washed up. That's about it. And that's because I was worried. But but no, seriously, I washed up and that was it, because it was like at the same time I'm tired. I never ever get to sit down somewhere. I'm always on the go, on the go, on the go. I need some rest. And so I actually had to be intentional about taking that rest today. I had to say, I'm not doing anything. And guess when I did it? When my husband left. He's gone taking my son camping. When he left, that's when I was like, now I can finally rest. Now I can sit down without having to feel wrong about sitting here chilling and not getting up to go and go do anything. But all of that stems from those same generational curses.
You just reminded me of why it's been a saying for a little while now on social media, that for Black people, rest is resistance. You had to be so intentional about resting today that it almost comes off like a form of resistance to your natural way of being, or to what you do on an everyday basis. Like, I'm resisting doing the things, so I'm going to just rest.
Yeah.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to mention too is colorism as a pattern as well. And that, of course, stems back to slavery, where the lighter skinned folk were in the home. They were able to be in air conditioning. They didn't have to do a lot of the same work as darker skinned people. And now we still have that pattern of looking at things as well. So it really speaks to the mental and how things that happened back then so long ago, we still think like that, even if it's not intentional. And sometimes we're just not aware of it. We still think like that, and we still behave in similar ways as they did back then.
And we make excuses for it. Y'all ever see, like, there's on social media and they be like, this is how the light-skinned man lion come through. And he's like singing and he's like, oh, but then they like make the dark-skinned lion come in. Like, they like, this how dark-skinned men come in. And it's like a Mufasa roar. Like, that's still colorism. They're still downplaying the Black man as soft. I mean, the light-skinned man as soft and just like a female, but then the dark-skinned man is strong, African, and bold. And that's a part of colorism.
And speaking of men, because you already talked about how Black women, that strong Black woman can be traced all the way back to slavery. For Black men, I think sometimes when we start talking about hypermasculinity and toxic masculinity, we don't take into account that because that type of trauma is passed down, at the time of slavery, Black men were considered, just like Black women, less than human, and they were literally broken. Like, you're not a man. You're not. So once they got free, it's like, I'm going to do everything I can to be a man, no matter what that takes. And I don't think we give grace for that. Like, there's a reason that we have that specifically in our community, and it's not an excuse or a justification. But if you believe that trauma is passed down, you have to take that into account.
I don't know. I'm really hoping that some of these systems can be broken with these curses, because I know that while we think it's generational, when does it stop? When do we take the opportunity on ourselves to say, you know what, this isn't right, or this isn't productive for me? When do we start asking those questions? This isn't productive for our community or our relationship or our children. When does that question come up?
Because when you, oh, my bad, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was done.
No, when you try to break generational curses, people get uncomfortable. People literally get mad at you while you're in the midst of trying to break generational curses. I'm going to give y'all an example. I was with my family and we started talking about colorism, because I was trying to make sure that my kids didn't have to ingest no colorism, because all of my kids are lighter skinned. And so my daughter came up and was like, hey, did you notice that you're dark, that you're the only dark one in the family? So we don't roll like that in my house. In my house, it's not that we don't talk about it, but we don't make it a thing. We always make it like, okay, that's not a thing. We all have different shades. We all have different hair. We all have different complexions. But it was brought to her by an outsider, to where it was kind of like, oh, this team light skins, team dark skins. And it was innocently brought because it was from another child. But at the same time, that's just the introduction of it. So then in real time, I corrected it. I was like, that ain't what we doing. That's not how we do in our family. But then it was like, oh, well, you're too passionate about the subject. There's something else amiss. You might have a problem with it, or you don't feel comfortable in your skin. And it was like, no, it's not that I don't feel comfortable in my skin, but my skin was always made fun of. My skin was all, I was always called ugly because I was dark. Everybody always had something negative to say about my skin. And so we suffer. You know what I mean? So I don't want to bring that dynamic in my household. But then it spiraled into like, well, light skinned people suffer too. Well, dark skinned people suffer more. And that was just a whole other, that was like a whole other thing that came in there. But when in real time, like you want to correct it because you don't want that stuff introduced and then perpetuated into the next generation. So if I could stop it with them, then it doesn't have to go on to my grandkids, and I don't have to have these same conversations with my grandkids. But in real time, like when you're doing it, it makes other people uncomfortable, especially if you get passionate.
And you know what? That speaks to how hard it is for different factions inside of our culture. It speaks to how hard it is to acknowledge privilege. Like we talk about how white people struggle to acknowledge their privilege, but within our own, light-skinned people struggle to acknowledge the privilege that we have. Yes, we might have experienced colorism, but it is not the same. And it is not anywhere near as bad, and it doesn't directly disenfranchise us as much as darker skinned Black people, because we're like, this is why when Black people started being able to be in movies and stuff, you saw all light skinned actresses. You didn't see dark skinned actresses like that unless they were playing the mammy role. So we when we're confronted with privilege that we have, that's hard. Just like for men, it's hard for them to acknowledge, yes, because you're a man, you do have certain privilege. For Black men, that's really hard for them. It's like, yeah, you have more privilege than me as a Black woman, but that's hard to confront your own privilege when you don't feel like you have any privilege.
Yeah, and really to answer Auntie Keisha's question about like when does it stop? When does the curse stop? When do we start making changes? It's a systemic issue, but it comes down like within that system, you have the individuals, you have the families, you have the different schools, you have the different community agencies, you have these smaller communities within the larger system. And I did write a dissertation on this. It was more geared towards parenting practices and how those have been passed down from generations. But I think the program that I proposed could work with any situation or with any topic. And it's more targeting those smaller communities, getting individuals to start changing the way that they think, just like Auntie Suge is doing. I'm changing the way that my kids are responding to these things. This is going to pass down because your next generation starts with you. A generation is a huge thing, right? But the next 10, 15, 20 years, it starts with you and your kids. And that's the next generation there. Your brother and sister and their kids, that's their next generation. So in order to make those changes, you start with the individual. That spreads to the kids, like Auntie Suge, that's going to spread to her kids. Her 5 kids going to have kids themselves. So that's about 15, 20 other people that spreads to. And then them 15, 20 people going to have more kids. So that's a whole community. So you start yourself. Like we're so worried about other people, trying to get other people to change how they think, to change, and there's nothing wrong with trying to help people see what the problem is and do something about it. But really, if we focus on ourselves, you naturally kind of infiltrate your own unit, and that spreads to other people. And you spread that positivity, you spread that change, and that's how you stop those curses. That's how you start positive things going down through generations. Sorry, I got real into that.
I like that.
I like it.
I'm really
into it too.
Baby,
I can ever do that program for real. I'm trying to do that in every state possible and get and spread it.
I loved it.
Now that's what you call a mic drop.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do want to acknowledge that you brought in parenting and that your program is specifically geared to parenting and changing it from that level first, because that's another thing when we talk about Auntie Keisha's question of when do we change it. A lot of times we don't want to change things because we don't want to acknowledge that they are not okay, or we want to make justifications and say they are okay. Like, for example, prior to the recording today, where we even got this idea from was the idea that slaves being whipped turned into kids being hit by belts for discipline. These things tie together, but none of our generations, I don't think, even people our age and younger, don't want to look at spanking as a thing we should stop. It's just a course of correct. It's just a way to correct. And that's not something you could change for the whole culture. So like you said, that's only something you can change for you and yours.
Yeah.
That one is loaded because spanking or spanking with the belt.
Either or.
I was about to say that was the original generational curse thing. Is spanking with the belt. But so that was another generational curse. That is another thing that came down, that's been handed down from generation to generation, even starting with slavery. But so since we are talking about generations, one thing that I think is the best generational thing that's happened is that Juneteenth is now a national holiday. So let's get into some positive stuff and talk about Juneteenth, because Juneteenth is the week that we're coming up on.
Ow.
I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black.
Hey y'all, it is Juneteenth because we black, y'all. So the aunties are celebrating Juneteenth, and we just gonna talk all things blackety black today. So first, I'm gonna give y'all a quick history of Juneteenth. All right, so Juneteenth is now a federal holiday in the United States, just made a federal holiday in 2021 by President Joe Biden. And it is commemorating the emancipation of enslaved African Americans, deriving the name from combining June and 19th. It is celebrated on the anniversary of the order issued by Major General Gordon Granger on June 19th, 1865, proclaiming freedom for slaves in Galveston, Texas, who were the last to find out that they had been freed.
So I did have to say this to one of my counterparts, because they were like, well, why is there a reason to have Juneteenth if we're all celebrating Independence Day? How come people have to separate everything? And I literally had to say, like, you do know that in 1776, the slaves were not free. So while everybody else was celebrating Independence Day, we was almost 100 years later free. We were literally serving the meals so y'all can celebrate Independence Day. Everybody wasn't free. That's why we celebrate Juneteenth. It befuddles me.
You know what befuddles me? Is that while we're given the opportunity to be physically free, I often think about, are we psychologically free? And that's just something that I think that that's the part that I laser in on, because we don't have the opportunities to break free from, whiteness and what that looks like, and how we continue to try to live up to the standards that they have. And when we don't meet those standards, are we really free? Mm-hmm. Or we want to make our own standards, are we really free? Because there are people who still mad about Juneteenth being a holiday. There's still people who don't like that. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up, one of the quotes from one of my favorite books by Andre Henry, All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep. He says, white supremacy has always been on the lookout for Black spokespeople, because a domination system will operate more smoothly when the subjugated comply. And I think about that when it comes to individuals who look like us, who continue to perpetuate things that's not giving us the freedom that we deserve. And we got the people, we know who they are in the media and in government, who say things that don't free us like we should. Mm-hmm. And, as much as I want to be excited about Juneteenth, sometimes I feel like our people ain't psychologically free. I know we physically free, but are we really free? Like really, really? So I don't want to be the bearer of bad news.
You're not the bearer of bad news.
I know I need to be excited about it, but unfortunately, look at how our country has gone over the past 3 years. They've taken our history out of schools. Is that free? Is that what we call freedom? Because they was doing that back for the Daughters of Confederacy, when they was doing that back in the 1700s, taking our education out of schools, making it what it want to. Police brutality. Are we really free? Are we really free? That's all I'm saying. That's all if y'all want to celebrate, that's fine. But I just wanted us to think about that psychological freedom as well.
Well, there's also a lot of chains to be broken mentally too. And I mean, I know you're talking about psychological freedom, but I mean mentally with standards of beauty too, because I think about that all the time. I'm like, how come we always have to look a certain way? We just talked about light skin culture earlier, and it's like, how come if I don't look like a certain person, then I'm not beautiful. And it's still perpetuated in the media, and it's perpetuated by some of our own people. So no, everybody is not free.
Ooh, and you just made me think now I could spin right off from that, because within our own group, I cannot wait till we get free of respectability politics, because when we talking about how we look and how we present ourselves, even when we've done the episode going back to bonnets, like that in and of itself is still a problem, because you are still trying to police what somebody wears because you're not comfortable, because you feel like they're not representing the race the correct way, as if one person can represent our whole race. We're not allowed to just be and have variety among us. We're seen as a monolith. So one person look a mess, that's indicative of an entire race. And that's a mental block too.
I don't think we're going to be psychologically free as long as we have to constantly defend ourselves, as long as we have to constantly talk about this and why are things this way? Why does this thing keep happening? Why does this thing keep happening? We're not going to be free in that way. I think that I think we should still celebrate the small victories. So Juneteenth is a small victory. And we should celebrate those and continue to make changes, not to just get complacent, like, oh, this law passed, now we're physically free and we have nothing else to worry about it. No, psychologically and mentally, we have a lot of things we're still holding on to that we still need to work on. But I do not want our community to get in the habit of constantly striving for better and ignoring the things that do happen that are positive, that are making a positive turn for all of us.
You know, Juneteenth, I didn't, unfortunately, as much as I'm a history nerd, I didn't know that it meant that we were not free in 1776. I didn't know that at first. And, you know, the more you know, the better, the better. But I am really proud of those individuals who did make it a point to make sure people knew our history and make sure that even though we can celebrate being Americans, let's celebrate who we are as people and where we've come from. So I do agree with Auntie Amber celebrating those small wins and how far we have come. But we still got a long way to go. Mm-hmm. We still got a long way to go, like a long way.
I don't even think that it's a small win. I think that that's a pretty large win, because never in history has anybody been willing to make anything that we've done a national holiday. Like there nobody really cares except for us. But you know what pisses me off is that some of us don't even care. Now, right now I'm in Shreveport. Shreveport is big in their culture. They're big in their history. It's a very, very large Black population. So you're going to get all the Juneteenth celebrations. I'm now a part of the Greek organization. So you're going to get a lot of Juneteenth celebrations in that, because they really, really, big up Black people and Black culture and helping the Black community. But when you grow up in places like where we're from, you can get it maybe in Buffalo, but you have cities like the ones I'm from, like Niagara Falls, where there's not these big celebrations, and we don't always celebrate who we are, because a lot of our streets are ran by Italian people. And so if it's easy to erase another culture and say, well, you know what, they don't really care about it, and then we don't do anything to show that we care about it too.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And I would venture to say, before they made Juneteenth a federal holiday, I believe the only federal holiday we had was MLK. That's been a federal holiday since the 80s, I think, something like that. But my thing is, I don't look at making Juneteenth a federal holiday as a big step, because I see so many things as performative. Like, it's nice, it's great to be acknowledged, but it's performative. How about, instead of giving us a federal holiday, how about you allow our history to be taught? How about we not be fighting to literally have our history taught in schools? Like, that's a bigger step. Like, giving us these performative little things here and there, that's not it for me. And maybe I'm just too hard on people, but I'm like, it's 2023. Enough with being performative. I want to see actual changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And speaking of changes, in Ohio, they're actually putting slavery back on the ballot. Hear me out. So you'll know that in the 13th Amendment, slavery is abolished, obviously. However, except if it's punishable by crime. And that is back on the ballot in Ohio. So again, when we talk about changes, when we talk about wanting to be psychologically free and physically free, in this case, how are we doing when it comes to being just up to date on those laws? Because Juneteenth was a law that had to be enacted. So how much are we participating in what those laws look like for us? What those laws, how they impact us? So, I think it's important for us to just continue to be aware that just like they can make those laws about Juneteenth, they can make laws about things that actually impact our communities and affect our Black men and our Black boys.
Now, when you say slavery being back in effect, but that's for who? Because I don't think that's something that ain't where we going.
What you mean? I'm sorry.
Like when you say that they're like talk about making a law about slavery being back in effect, for who? For what cultures? What people?
It's a law for everybody. That law would be for because prison. You can be
prison.
For prison. If you commit a crime, technically you can literally be made a slave for the state. But who is disproportionately in prison?
Okay, because I was like, who they going to get? I didn't understand. Like
I didn't sign up for that.
You like,
you was gonna have to go back and check. Me?
I ain't gonna make it.
No, thank you for clarifying. I should have clarified that. But yes, they are talking about the 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery except punishable by crime. And so they're putting it back on the ballot in Ohio for the voters to vote whether they want to basically take that out, amend our Constitution or not. Our Ohio Constitution.
And see, that's my thing. So the state of Ohio is doing that. That shouldn't even be allowed to be something on a state ballot. It should be a federal law that can't happen anywhere. So see, they made Juneteenth a federal holiday. They can make something a federal law to where no state can override it. And that's my thing, talking about being performative. You giving us Juneteenth, but people can still be slaves in prison? Like, make it make sense.
So I don't know if people are going to hate me for saying this. So I hope y'all gonna have my back.
I got you.
I know.
It depends on what you say, Jack. Hold on.
No, it just, for me, it's like, okay, we're talking about the laws, we're talking about the system, we're talking about all those things changing. And I get it. I get they need to change. I get that we have some power to vote and make some of these things change. But y'all, within ourselves, we got a lot of shit to deal with too. Like mentally, like we need to make those changes mentally, psychologically. Our psychological freedom is not solely dependent on the laws that there are. Yes, that's a huge part of it because you have to live in this world. You have to abide by the laws. Well, you're supposed to abide by the laws. But a lot of it is us thinking very similarly to our ancestors who were slaves and not getting out of the way that we think about stuff. Like we literally will sit here and repeat behaviors in different ways, but it's kind of the same theme or the same pattern. We'll repeat it over and over and over again, and then sit out here and call out the government. It's the government's fault. It's white people's fault. But like, what the heck? Like, are we doing anything to change how we're thinking? And y'all know that's probably because I work on the individual level, and I'm always looking at it in that way. Yes, the system there can be changes there, and there are people in our community working on that. But individually, we have to make those changes, or they can change all the laws that they want, and we're still gonna be stuck.
I love you.
You ain't wrong. You ain't wrong.
I love you.
I'm glad y'all ain't gonna fight me because I ain't know how y'all are going.
It does take internal work. It does. He's saying in his book about how we have to do the internal work first in order for us to get people to be in solidarity. So you're absolutely right. We can't get to the system level unless we all internally do the work first. So you're absolutely right.
But this goes directly into those generational curses not being broken, because the one thing that is not broken is that we give passes for crime. In our community, we say, well, there's a reason why he did this. There's a reason why he did that. And you know what? There is a lot of reasons why people commit crimes. And I think that stuff should be looked at. But also, I fault everybody in the vicinity of a person that's committing crimes, whether they're stealing, they're selling drugs, whatever they're doing, because at some point in time, there have not been mentors in their life, and there's not been anybody to take them to therapy for their trauma. And a lot of people, what do your daddy say, Amber? Commit crimes because of low self-esteem, low self-worth, being embarrassed and not wanting to, you know what I mean? What is it? Ego. All of those things that are not in check. So I like that you said it.
I totally like that you said it. I can't even disagree. I do I know you're going to get some pushback for it, but it is what it is. Everything starts on the individual level. And honestly, I had a thought and I lost it. It went right with what Auntie Suge was saying. What's the last thing you said, Suge?
Talking about ego and people commit crimes because of their ego, but not getting help for their mental health problems.
It literally escapes me what I was thinking. God dog it. Maybe it'll come back to me and it'll fit. It literally went out.
I'll go ahead. I agree with both what Auntie Suge and Auntie Emperor is saying. I think that the two system has to work together. Yes, I'm more from a systems approach because that's what I work with is a system, but there's definitely an individual approach that definitely does not need to be ignored. And how we address ourselves internally is how it's going to come out externally and how that's going to impact others, and specifically in our community. So I definitely agree with that. And I think that, where does that start? I guess the question is, where does that start when it comes to internally?
Yes. That's when it's tricky because it's awareness. Like y'all think about how we do therapy. When you start to do therapy with someone, the first thing you're working on is, if they're not in crisis, let me say that. If they're not in crisis, the first thing you're working on is awareness. Are you aware that you even do these things? Right. Do you even recognize what you're doing? Right. So one of the things Auntie Suge brought to us, well, not on here, in our group chat, was about the generational curses and the belt versus the slave whip. I don't know that a lot of people put two and two together. I actually didn't even really think about it until I saw that. But this is what I mean by us continuing similar behavioral patterns and not really acknowledging or recognizing that it stems directly from that. Slaves were whipped for what? For making mistakes, doing things they weren't supposed to be doing, talking out of line, whatever, even the smallest things. And then you come and you whip your kids, or whoop your kids. Even the word is similar, but you whoop your kids for making mistakes, for doing things they're not supposed to do. So that's just like a direct example. But again, we do these things and we probably don't make the connections. We don't sit down and actually think about it. We just go through life, just do. We never rest. Like Auntie Keith said earlier, we just keep going and going and going, and we don't take the time to stop and think about it. Like, yo, what am I doing? Yep. Why am I doing this? And what can I do to change this? Because this ain't right.
Yep. And Keith said it on another episode from the first season. It just clicked that she said that a lot of times, like just bringing up the discipline part of how we discipline our children, that happens because we don't have power anywhere else. I remember her saying that in another episode.
Yes, she did.
That didn't come from me. They came from a person on TikTok.
It came from somebody on TikTok, but we have power nowhere else. And even that can go back to slavery. The overseer didn't have real power, but they had power over those particular slaves. And the other thing that I want to bring up before we kind of wrapped up today is when we talk about the individual level, we don't even come from an individualistic mindset. Like, I want people to realize us historically, our people who were brought here were collectivist. So when we lost the village, we lost a lot. And now we don't have the village. I can't raise my kids, me and my husband, on our own. It requires help from the village, from our elders. But so many people don't want that. So we've strayed away from our history of who we were. And then we wonder why we can't get out of the psychological bondage that we're in.
You know what? And I agree with that. But when it comes to our elders also, we don't want our kids chastised by people. Because a lot of times our elders are coming with the whip.
And that's not okay.
And that's not okay. So the first thing we want to do is we want to police the way that they teach our kids. The first thing we want to say is that ain't okay. Don't put your hands on my kid. But our elders were never taught to not maybe whoop somebody. All of my friends I know got whoopings, including myself. And the elders that we come from, they got their butts whipped. So they're not coming from this new psychological perspective that we're coming from. Everybody didn't go to school for mental health. Everybody didn't learn that, there are other ways to handle a kid. Maybe a whooping should be a last resort. They didn't learn that. They learned go straight to that. So it's hard to get help from them when the parenting is so drastically different, and you don't want their help because you don't want them inflicting their trauma. That's the tricky part for us.
That's true.
Ooh. I will say this. I learned from an old college student. She said, it's not that they're smarter than us. They outstructure us. And I never forgot that because I think about how our communities are being outstructured. So how do we build a structure that is conducive to our our communities, like you're talking about the village. How do we build this structure that's going to help us on the individual and systemic level? And I feel like we lost that. You're right, Ashley. I feel like there's not nothing there. But then Auntie Suge's right, because it's like, it's okay, it could be there, but now we're coming from two different generations with two different mindsets, and now they're clashing.
You know where the connect can be made, because me and my mom have talked about this before. It's one thing for the village to help, but there's still respect. Our we know our culture is big on respect. Black folks big on respect. Don't disrespect me, respect me.
Black folks big on respect the elders. They don't respect kids.
That's true too. They don't look at kids like human beings who have autonomy. But when I say that, I'm more so talking about the adults. Like my mother, once I became a parent, she didn't try to overstep my parenting by telling me how to parent. And that's really the disconnect. Just because you are my elder, I'm also grown now. So yes, I want your help. But if I request something of you when it comes to you got to raise me. You got to raise your kids. I just need the village there, but I don't need you to tell me step by step what I should be doing with my child. And if I request that you don't hit them, there's other ways to do this. Like nobody wants to really admit there are other ways to try to do this, because it didn't even help everybody who got it from our generation. Because I know plenty of whooped kids who sitting in a jail cell right now, or in a grave, or on somebody's stripper pole. So it did not help everybody.
I think it goes back to what Auntie Amber was saying, the awareness of the internal work of what we got to do, like what you got to do first, you know? So I definitely agree with what you're saying, Ashley, but I also think that there's some awareness as to why certain families don't get the outcome that they want, because everybody's not aware of their own internal bullshit that they got going on. Yep. And you have to uncover that the whole peeling back the onion thing, you have to uncover those things to get to the root of their problem first. Then we can start moving forward to how can we address this problem as a community.
Yeah, and you can still be a collectivistic culture. Like you can still come from that perspective while you're working on yourself, because the idea is that I'm doing this for me and my family. I'm also working with my mom and dad on this, my brother and them on this, and I'm trying to pull everybody in with me so we can make this change collectively. I'm doing all the things that I'm doing so that my kids can have this, and so that their kids can have this. So it's still a collectivistic mindset, but it's like, I know you cannot ignore that you have a part in it, that you play a role in that. As we continue to have these conversations, just thinking about what role do you play in it. Even if you take a step back and look at, what are some of the things that I do that I've learned from my parents or from my grandparents or, from other generations. And is it adaptive? Is it something that's helping me, helping my children, helping the people around me? Or is it something that's harming them in some way? Even if you don't intend on harming people, you can still have that effect on them. And just thinking about that and making changes for yourself, you'll be surprised when you make these small changes. You'll get some resistance from some people, and other people may accept it very easily, but you're making these changes and people will start to follow the more other people start to change. It becomes a group mindset, but it starts with the individual person.
Yep. And you know what y'all can do as individuals, everybody who's watching the show right now, I continue to say this daily on social media. One thing about us is that I hear so many of us say we want to have positive portrayals of our community, of Black people. We want positivity. We want to have excellence in all these things. But y'all got to actually support positivity. So the one small change you can make right now today is sharing this podcast, sharing this with somebody, posting this on your page. Stop posting trash if you want to see things in the community change. Like that's the first step to psychological change, is your outlook and what you put out there. So put out positivity, repost the Clinical Cookout, repost other great Black positive podcasts. Stop doing the very thing that you claim you want to change.
So we talked about Juneteenth. We talked about positivity. Now we just want to know what y'all about to do.
Generational curses.
Generational curses.
Damn. I wasn't ready. Do it again. Do it again. I can do it. I can do it.
And today that topic is going to be
Generation.
Huh? What was we saying?
We said the wrong thing.
Watermelon.
What? That's a stereotype, but we can talk about those too.
I just wanted to show you I was eating watermelon for our Juneteenth episode.
That could be taken all kinds of ways. It could be taken positively, or it could be taken, okay, she hitting the stereotype that Negroes eat watermelon.
I'd be tearing some watermelon up in the summer.
And me too. And me too.
Watermelon tastes like watered down.
You don't like watermelon, Keisha?
No.
It's
no,
always
ma'am.
one black
You gotta
person.
get the good sweet ones.